The street was dry and cruel that day, the kind of afternoon when dust rose like laughter, settling into every crack of wood and every crease of skin. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the general store, its wheels groaning as though it too carried more weight than it ought. From its shadowed cabin stepped a woman not easily ignored, though many tried. Clara May adjusted her bonnet against the blaze of the sun. Her cheeks flushed not with heat alone but with a knowing burn of eyes fixed upon her. Her dress, plain calico, clung to her frame in ways that the town's narrow tongues had already decided were worth whispering about. The air was thick with snickers barely hidden, the kind that stung sharper than outright jeers, and she felt each one like a stone thrown at her ribs. Among the onlookers stood Jedediah Boone, a man built by labor and silence. His shoulders carried the memory of plowing through storms, his eyes darkened by years of loss that left him wary of hope. He had arranged for her to come, sent word months before through an agency that traded futures like cattle. Yet when she finally arrived, he found himself unable to move at first, as though the dust between them was a gulf wider than any river. The laughter of others cut the space thinner, and in a single step forward, he silenced it, not by speaking, but by offering his hand. Clara hesitated only a moment before placing hers into his. Rough palm to trembling fingers, the pact was sealed, and the town's amusement grew louder in its cruelty. The walk to his wagon was long, not by distance but by the weight of gazes pressing into her back. Children giggled openly, women whispered behind lace fans, and men smirked with the ease of those convinced they knew another's worth. Clara kept her chin raised, though inside she folded inward, asking herself if this choice, this marriage sealed by letters and signatures, was not already the mistake they believed it to be. Jedediah lifted her trunk into the wagon with a strength that cost him nothing and spoke even less. They rode out of town without a word exchanged, only the creak of wheels and the steady clip of hooves marking time. The Boone homestead appeared after miles of quiet plains, a modest ranch weathered gray by sun and storm. It was not unwelcoming, but it bore no softness either. The porch boards sagged, the barn leaned, and the house itself seemed to sigh from years of loneliness. Clara stepped down and breathed in the scent of hay and dust, a scent that clung to the bones of the land. Jedediah showed her inside with the caution of a man uncertain how to share space with another soul. His voice was low, each word measured. "You'll find the kitchen there. Bedroom upstairs. Supper at sundown. Nothing more. No welcome, no smile, no tenderness. Just the cadence of routine spoken aloud." Clara set her things down and sat on the edge of the narrow bed, hands clasped in her lap. She was not a stranger to loneliness. It had followed her since girlhood, dressed in mockery and disappointment. But here, in this house echoing with silence, it took on a sharper form. She rose, unpinned her bonnet, and began to work. If nothing else, she would carve her place into these walls. The stove was scrubbed, dust swept, linens aired. By the time Jedediah returned from tending cattle, the room smelled faintly of bread dough rising and soap cutting through years of neglect. He noticed, though he said little. Only when she placed the bread before him at supper did his eyes meet hers, holding for a fraction longer than habit allowed. He tore a piece, chewed slowly, and murmured, "Good." That single syllable, worn and plain, settled deep inside Clara, sparking warmth where only chill had lived before. It was not affection, not yet, but it was acknowledgment. She carried it like a lantern into the long nights that followed. Still, the town would not let her forget. Each trip to gather supplies became a trial, eyes following her bulk as though she were a sideshow attraction. Words hissed low enough to hear yet not confront. Boone could have done better. Poor man must be desperate. Clara kept her gaze steady, lips pressed thin, but inside the shame coiled tighter. Every pound of her body became another accusation, every curve a sin against the frontier's idea of usefulness. She returned to the ranch heavy with more than groceries. Jedediah noticed in ways he did not speak of. He saw how her shoulders slumped when she returned, how her hands shook slightly as she unpacked flour and beans. He did not know how to lift her from that weight, for he was a man who had buried family with his own hands, who had learned that words could not stitch closed a wound. So he remained silent, and silence often felt like distance. Nights were long, the space between them and the bed a canyon untraveled. Yet life persisted. Clara tended chickens, gathered eggs, mended clothes with neat, sturdy stitches. She was no ornament but a worker, and the land slowly began to reflect her care. The ranch, once brittle with neglect, took on a subtle order, as though it had been waiting for her hands all along. Jedediah began to find his shirts mended before he asked, his meals hot though he came in late. He never said thank you, not in words, but his gaze lingered longer, and sometimes his breath hitched as if he wanted to speak but could not. Then came the storm. Clouds thickened black against the horizon, wind howling like a chorus of old ghosts. Rain lashed against windows, and the barn shuddered under the weight of the gale. Clara rose in the night to a sound outside, faint cries, almost lost beneath thunder. She pulled a shawl around her and stepped into the storm, lantern lifted against the roar of rain. In the barn, through shadows and hay scattered wild, she found them, 2 children huddled together, clothes soaked, faces pale with hunger and fear. A girl no older than 7, clutching the hand of her brother, perhaps 10. Clara knelt without hesitation, wrapping them in her shawl, drawing them to her chest despite their shaking. The boy whispered hoarsely, "We ain't got no home." Tears mingled with rain on Clara's cheeks. She drew them closer, rocking slightly, whispering nonsense words of comfort until their trembling eased. Jedediah appeared in the doorway, lantern in hand, his face carved with shock at the sight before him. Clara turned, hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes fierce yet tender as she cradled the children. For a moment the storm outside was forgotten, only the fragile circle of warmth within mattered. Something shifted in Jedediah's gaze, something soft, something long locked away. He stepped forward, reaching instinctively to help gather the children into stronger shelter. When at last the storm broke, the ranch held more than silence. It held possibility. Clara sat with the children near the fire, their small heads resting against her arms, while Jedediah watched from the doorway. For the first time since her arrival, she did not feel like an intruder or a burden. She felt, perhaps, like the beginning of something larger. The fire cracked, and for the briefest of moments, Clara May allowed herself to believe that she might yet belong, not just to this house or this land, but to the life that could grow from it. And though morning had not yet come, she felt its promise stirring, waiting beyond the horizon. The morning after the storm dawned sharp and clean, the air rinsed of dust, the horizon burning gold as if the sky itself wished to begin anew. Clara May stood by the hearth, her shawl wrapped around the 2 children who had not left her side since the night before. They were fragile things, faces hollowed by hunger, hands clinging with a desperation that pierced deeper than words. The boy's eyes were wary, his shoulders squared as if he had been forced too young into a man's place. The girl leaned wholly into Clara's arm, her small frame trembling each time the wind moaned against the boards. Jedediah Boone entered quietly, his boots leaving damp marks across the floor. He studied the scene with the caution of a man unused to such intrusions on the order of his life. 4 years, his ranch had been a place of silence, his grief sealed away like grain in a bin no one dared open. But now, 2 small bodies breathed beneath his roof, filling it with a kind of vulnerability he feared most. Clara looked up at him, her eyes steady though her cheeks were drawn from sleepless hours. "They've nowhere else to go," she said simply, her voice carrying no plea, only truth. Jedediah's jaw tightened. His gaze moved from Clara to the children, then back again. He wanted to say no, wanted to protect the fragile balance of the life he had carved through loss and endurance. Yet something in the sight of Clara's arms around them, arms that had been mocked for their breadth, now sheltering 2 orphans, made refusal impossible. He turned toward the window instead, muttering, "We'll see what can be done." Days lengthened into weeks, and the ranch began to breathe with new rhythms. Clara tended to the children with a devotion that startled even herself. She sewed patches into their clothes, sang lullabies in the quiet evenings, and told stories that reached into corners of their imaginations untouched by sorrow. The boy, Nathan, learned to carry water and chop kindling under Jedediah's watchful eye, while little Ruth clung to Clara's skirts, her laughter returning like a timid bird testing new wings. The town, however, was merciless. News traveled quickly, and gossip bloomed in the saloon and church pews alike. "She can't bear her own, so she gathers strays," someone sneered within Clara's hearing, their eyes sliding over her frame with that old familiar judgment. She felt the sting, but this time she did not fold. She held Ruth's hand tighter, brushed the insult aside like chaff, and carried her purchases home without a word. Jedediah, though, did not let it pass. One afternoon in the mercantile, when a rancher chuckled and said, "Boone's fat bride's gone and built herself a brood from scraps," Jedediah's fist came down on the counter with a crack. "She's worth 10 of any of you," he growled, his voice low but fierce. "My house wasn't a home till she stepped in it." The room fell silent, the weight of his words lingering long after he walked out. Clara did not hear them directly, but when he returned that evening, there was something in his eyes that told her, at last, he had chosen to stand with her openly. The children grew bolder under her care. Nathan began to laugh, a rusty sound at first, then brighter, carrying across the yard as he raced Ruth through the fields. Clara found herself laughing too, her voice startling her with its fullness, as though some locked door inside had been thrown open. Jedediah watched them often from the fence, arms folded, his heart restless in ways he could not easily name. He was beginning to see not just a wife where once he saw duty, but a woman whose courage redefined the shape of his days. The test came one sweltering evening in midsummer. The scent of smoke reached them first, sharp and bitter, borne on a sudden gust of wind. Clara's eyes widened. She turned toward the barn where a faint orange glow was licking at the edges of the roof. Nathan's shout confirmed her fear. Ruth had wandered in earlier, chasing a kitten. Without pause, Clara ran. The townsfolk gathered quickly, drawn by the rising smoke, their whispers cutting sharper than the flames themselves. "She'll never manage, not her size," someone muttered. But Clara did not hear them. Her skirts caught on rough boards as she pushed through the thickening smoke, lungs burning, eyes stinging. Inside, she found Ruth sobbing near a collapsed beam, the kitten trembling beside her. The fire roared like a wild animal, heat pressing down with merciless weight. Clara heaved at the beam, her muscles screaming, but she would not relent. With a final wrench, she cleared the way, scooping Ruth into her arms. The child's tears soaked her dress as she staggered back through the smoke, every breath a battle. She emerged into the open air, coughing, soot streaked across her face, Ruth clinging desperately to her neck. Silence fell upon the crowd. The laughter that had followed her since her first step off the stagecoach was gone, replaced by awe, even shame. Jedediah rushed forward, steadying her with one arm, his other hand trembling as he touched Ruth's head to be certain she was safe. The barn could not be saved, but what mattered had been carried out of its flames. As the embers cooled, Jedediah stood before Clara, his voice breaking in a way she had never heard. "They're ours now," he said, glancing at the children, then back to her. "Because you chose them first. Because you chose us all." His words carried no hesitation, only a raw truth that made Clara's chest ache with something more than relief. That night, as the children curled beside her by the hearth, Ruth's small voice whispered, "Good night, Ma." The word was fragile yet whole, a gift laid gently into Clara's keeping. Nathan echoed it with a shy glance, his face softening into trust. Clara held them close, her heart swelling with a love that burned brighter than any flame. For the first time in her life, the echoes of ridicule could not reach her. She had been measured, mocked, diminished, but here, within these walls, within these arms, she was more than enough. Jedediah lingered at the doorway, watching the three of them, his silence no longer distance but reverence. He saw in her not the woman others laughed at, but the one who had stitched his broken home into a family with nothing but courage and open hands. Outside, the stars spread wide across the prairie sky, countless and unyielding. Inside, the fire crackled softly, carrying with it a sense of promise not yet fully spoken but certain all the same. Clara closed her eyes, the children breathing steady against her, and let the weight of belonging settle deep into her bones. For once, the world's laughter no longer mattered. What mattered was here, and it was hers. And though dawn had not yet risen, Clara knew it would come gilded with hope, for the house that once echoed with emptiness now carried the sound of love rooted firmly, unshakably, in its beams.